Special Educator Summer Series Week 4. Welcome back. I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. We are talking about building an independent work system that actually works. We're doing this all summer long. I will be showing up every Wednesday with a new video, so be sure to hit follow here on YouTube at Positively Learning. I'm also going to be back on Fridays with a new podcast episode all about your independent work systems. Real quick, if you are just finding us, welcome. This is week 4. So you definitely want to go back to the foundation episode, go there first, and then work your way through. Everything builds on each week. These are bite size. So if you're following along, this is going to help us keep us from being overwhelmed. But if you don't even want to think about school yet, totally understand. You could always binge watch all of these. Now, the first week we talked about where our independent work system breaks down. The second week, I had you picking the 3 skills we're going to be focusing in on this summer, what skills your students need. And then last week, we worked through letter A. Let me show you real quick in the tasks framework. And that was all about what materials do you have access to. We talked about doing an inventory sort so you know what you have and what you still need, where those gaps are. Today, we're doing the first S in the tasks framework, which is setup tools. We're setting the stage. Now, I told you, I think last week, that this would be one of the most important episodes in the series. And I definitely meant it, because this is where we're going to get into what actually makes a task work for independent use. The good news is it's very specific. That's great news, because if you have ever tried independent work, or if you've ever put a task out for a student, something you knew that they could do, something you've used before, and you watch them just sit there, or they may have started and then halfway through they stopped and looked at you with no idea what to do next. If that's ever happened to you, we can fix that. Maybe your first instinct was, they should know how to do this, and you are not wrong. Or maybe it was, independent work just doesn't work for us. I'm never going to be able to pull small groups, teach, take data, because my students can't work independently. And I'm going to challenge that, because I want to say maybe the task wasn't actually set up for independence. That's what we're talking about today. There's a huge difference between a task a student can do and a task a student can do independently. A task a student can do, that means they have the skill. They understand the concept. You have evidence of this. And if you sat near them or had close proximity, they'd probably be able to get through it. Maybe it was a look that you gave or pointed to get them started, or just a thumbs up to keep them going. But a task a student can do independently, it's all of that, but the task itself, that structure, that's what's telling the student how to start, what to do while they're working, and when they're finished, without depending on you. Most tasks and learning centers out there are in that first category, but most independent work needs to be in the second. And that gap where the breakdown happens, that's what we're talking about today. So I want to show you what I refer to as the anatomy of independent work. Now, this example shows a task box. However, it could be substituted for a file folder or a work binder, whatever works best for your students. Every independent task, every successful independent task has 3 things: a clear start, a clear middle, and a clear finish. So we're going to go through each one. This is what I meant by very specific. And the great news is if someone is missing, we can just fix it. We can fill it in. Maybe it's going to be in the task itself, which is ideal. Maybe it'll be in something that you have in your classroom. This is the best news of all if you've tried independent work and it hasn't been successful. All right, let's talk about the clear start. The student sits down and knows exactly how to begin, not because you just told them right before, but because the task itself signals a beginning. Maybe it's the container that you've used. Maybe it's the title. Maybe it's a visual checklist. Maybe it's a color-coded starting point. Whatever it is, when the student arrives at the task, they don't need to look up and ask you what to do, because that start is built in. There also needs to be a clear middle, the work time. Once a student starts, they need to know what success looks like while they are starting. not just at the end, but along the way. This is where a lot of tasks can fall apart in the middle. A student is working and they make a choice. They're not sure if they're right. So instead of continuing, they might stop and wait. A task with a clear work component has that structure built in. In this example, you see the visual directions that have the I can statement, which is very student friendly, but there's also picture support. A student should be able to keep going with the task without needing your confirmation. And then a task should have a clear finish. And it's not just when they complete the task, they're out of task cards, all the puzzle pieces have fit. That is a clear finish. But we also want to think about, what do they do when they're done? What does it look like physically? Are they moving the task from left to right at their table? Are they putting the task, closing it up, putting it in a finished bin or a completed folder? Do you have a specific way to signal that the work is done and what they're supposed to do next? Now, if we do not provide these clear starts, clear work, clear finish, the best case scenario is a student will try to figure it out on their own or stop and wait for us. But of course, another scenario is if they don't know what to do, they're going to fill in that gap. And maybe that's not what we were hoping for, the way they choose. Maybe it's getting up, interrupting, talking, poking somebody, all those things that we know can happen. Something that is not mentioned here, but I think is so worth saying, is something I found out from my own experience. High success with task boxes, but I had to learn trial and error. What I learned is that there was a sweet spot to the amount of task, the amount of activities or task cards in this case, that my students could handle. I wanted them to experience a quick win, and I didn't want them to be bored. So I had to find that sweet spot, the exact amount of task cards that my students could do. And for us, working with primarily kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade levels, we found that the sweet spot was around 10 task cards, whether it was matching, sorting, multiple choice. Around 10 was great. It might be a different number for you. It might be 5, it might be 15. The reason 10 worked out really well for us is just through observation. I could see the first 1, 2, maybe 3 task cards. My students were into it. These task boxes are short and sweet, quick wins. There's a lot of novelty. They get to get a new one. It has different images. It might have a different fine motor manipulative added to it, like one-to-one correspondence with mini erasers, something my students could touch, whatever was developmentally appropriate, but there was novelty. So the first 1, 2, maybe 3 task cards were still, my students were going strong. They got started, they knew what to do, they were into it. And then around 4 or 5, my students were still okay. Maybe that novelty was fading, but they were hanging in. But card 6 or 7, that's when attention started to wander. Maybe engagement was getting lower. What I found is 10 was our sweet spot because there was a visual. If my students had reached 6 or 7 and they were starting to fade a little bit, but they saw they only had 3 or 4 more to go, there was a good chance that we were going to build up the stamina to make it to card 10. And then they're going to experience that sense of accomplishment. But just imagine if they had gotten that card 6 or 7 and they saw 10, 15, 20 more cards. What do you think would have happened? Do you think my students would have pushed through, seeing all those cards left? I don't even think my students would make it to card 10. I think they would have just stopped at card 6 or 7 and been like, no way, I'm not doing that. So when I describe a clear start, a clear work, a clear finish, that is what I'm referring to. And it can look different from student to student. You know best what your students need. Now, a lot of teachers might be hearing this and being like, okay, this sounds great, but I've already done a lot of work, and this sounds like a lot of work to set them up. I do want to push back on that a little, not because it's not a lot of work, but because I don't think the setup is the hard part. I think the hard part is when you have set these up and you are managing a classroom where students can't work without you, where every independent work, period, like block, requires constant supervision, and you can't pull a small group because not everybody else knows what they're doing. That to me is harder than setting up a task correctly. A task that's set up with a clear start, a clear middle, a clear finish it can run on its own. You do have to do the setup once, but the task does the work every time after that. A task that isn't set up this way is going to need you every time. So maybe you've grabbed some free tasks, some tasks from the teacher next door, a task from a learning center that was like a one size fits all classroom center that you put into a task box. That could really cost you because students don't have that consistent structure, which means they're going to be looking for it from you. So that's what I mean when I say independent work shouldn't depend on you. Not that your students don't need support, they do, but the task itself should carry some of that support as much as possible. So you are not the one holding the whole thing together. That is what we talked about when we are looking at our tasks. So now we want to have our homework. Your homework this week has two parts. First off, here we are in the tasks framework. Next week, we're going to be moving to K to keep it organized. We're not done when we get to S. We're going to start troubleshooting after that. So do not worry. We're still going to be here all summer, helping, supporting, getting the system set up. But what I want to do is just focus on the one thing for right now. We're going to be focusing in on auditing one task. And you want to think about what we just talked about, the clear start, clear middle, clear finish. Where does it fall apart? What is not built into the task? And we're going to fix that one thing. Now, fixing that one thing might be getting a different task, or maybe there's another way we can fix it. Maybe it's adding a starting point or a finishing point. Maybe it's adding a color-coded sticker. Maybe it's adding visual directions. Maybe it's using something you already have and adding it to your system. Maybe it's putting something on a student desk. I do have lots of ideas that we're going to be talking about next week. So maybe it's just auditing the task, finding where the confusion is, and then we'll take it next week. I do want to mention, if you're thinking about this homework and thinking, I don't have any tasks, I cannot do this homework, I don't want you to miss out. I do have some free tasks. I'm going to put this link in the show notes that these 3 come in one download. So maybe the put it in the backpack is going to be just right for your students. It is a open-ended put in task. It's errorless. There is an option where students can follow directions in the task, or you can use it as a put in errorless task. You can choose. There's also a sentence comprehension. There's also a smart choices that I would recommend for an older beginner who is reading. So those 3 come in the download. It's free. If you do not have a task in mind to do your homework, you can choose one of these. That we're going to be thinking about where a task breaks down. And these are already built out for you. So you actually don't need to do your homework because they are already set up with that structure in place. This is exactly what we have in the Task Box Club. Every task in the library was designed around those 3 principles we talked about today. So you don't have to do that modifying. You just need to choose the right skill and the right level. I'll put a link to the free tasks in the show notes. I will also put a link to the Task Box Club if you want to look at what skills we have. And let me know if you have any questions, because we're going to come back next week and keep building. Be sure to hit follow, and I'll catch you next time. Keep going. Have a great week.